guys. Thanks, Layne. Okay. Hi, welcome to ETH Denver. My name is Layne Haber. I'm one of the co-founders at Connext, where I spend a lot of my time doing research on the protocol, and we build interoperability protocols. And I'm going to talk about modular interoperability and what that means and how you can use it to build secure cross-chain applications, not simply multi-chain applications. So first, kind of a background on why bridge security is important and why you should care about it. Imagine that you're an extremely security-focused Ethereum user. So you verify every single detail of your transactions that you send from a hardware wallet every time you send one. You didn't jump to Matic or BSC because you wanted the security of the Ethereum verifier set, so you stayed on mainnet until rollups came around, and you paid the extra gas because security is really that important to you. So you've got your funds on Arbitrum. You feel comfortable that they're there. You want to move them to Optimism because you feel comfortable on Optimism as well. But you decide to use a bridge. And you may not know a ton about bridges. They're kind of new. There's not a lot of good resources out there about how to evaluate the security. And you happen to choose a bridge that is externally verified. Well, congratulations, you played yourself, because now you have completely bypassed the security of the Ethereum verifier set, and your transaction is only backed by the bridge verifiers, which is likely a much smaller, much less diverse group of validators. So you really only have the security of that bridge verifier set, and all of the extra gas costs you paid to stay on mainnet while everybody else was on Polygon were for naught. So let's take a step back and kind of evaluate what bridges exist and what the setups are for them and how we can think about their security models. So the first is a natively verified bridge, and these are like light client bridges where there's some block header verification for the bridge itself to make sure that the transactions are secure. These are awesome because you can pass pretty much any data you want from one chain to another. They're very generalizable. They are also very trust minimized because you're only depending on the chain's validator set. There's nothing extra that you're adding into the mix. Unfortunately, they're definitely not extensible because they depend a lot on the underlying architecture and consensus mechanisms of the domains. So I can't take the near Rainbow bridge and put it on, copy paste it and have it work for Evmos to mainnet. It just won't work like that. On the other hand, you have externally verified bridges, and these have a different set of trade-offs where you can port them easily from domain to domain. Nothing usually about the protocol or the logic is domain specific. So I can take the same externally verified bridge protocol and take it from Matic to Celo to Evmos to what have you, and it should all still have the same security model. You can also pass generalized data through these bridges, which is very helpful. But unfortunately, you're relying on the verifiers of the bridge, not of the underlying domain. So it's not exactly trust minimized. Some examples of this are if you've ever heard of a multi-sig bridge, that's an externally verified bridge. AnySwap, Thorchain, those types of things fall into this category. And usually it means there's some set of validators that are making sure that the deposits in match the funds that are minted out, or the burns that you submit match the funds that are released from the locked deposit. A third example is locally verified bridges, and these are kind of like your atomic swaps, your hash locks, what have you, but basically these take a complex multi-party problem and reduce it to just two parties. And in these setups, you normally have a counterparty who is, for the duration of this transaction, your economic adversary. So you're both highly incentivized to verify that your counterparty is doing the correct thing. So if in a hash lock, for example, I would be incentivized before I revealed the secret to make sure that you put the right amount of the right asset up on your side of the trade. So locally verified systems, they're great because they're extensible. You can pass them through a bunch of different domains. They're, trust minimized because you can verify everything that your counterparty is doing, but unfortunately they are not very generalizable. Like you can't really, they're not designed well to pass general data between the two counterparties. So that kind of brings us to a good mental model for how to evaluate different bridge models called the interoperability trilemma. And similar to the scalability trilemma, just says that you can only have 2 of these 3 very desirable properties when you're building a bridge. So it can either be generalizable, meaning I can pass whatever data through it, trust minimized, meaning I'm not adding any additional trust assumptions, or extensible, which means I can easily port the same protocol to different domains. Light clients are generalized and trust minimized, but not extensible. Atomic swaps, trust minimized, extensible, not generalized. And externally verified systems are extensible and generalizable, but not trust minimized. So they all take a different portion. They all have different trade-offs that are important to understand. So whenever you're dealing with a particularly hairy problem like this, you're never going to find like a silver bullet solution that's going to allow you to have your cake and eat it too. You're only going to be able to navigate the trade-off space. And you know, when you're trying to solve this problem, that pretty much means you're going to have to do like what we did with the scalability trilemma, where we start building things in a modular fashion so each layer can have different trade-offs that work best for that specific layer of the stack. So if you look at Ethereum and its roll-up ecosystem, Ethereum, decentralized, secure, certainly not scalable. Roll-ups, scalable, secure, but they're definitely not decentralized. But as an end consumer of these systems, I'm able to use a roll-up on Ethereum and kind of have the best of all 3 worlds. And you can take a similar approach to solving the interoperability trilemma by building these things modularly. An important building block in this paradigm is a different type of bridge, which I didn't mention before, which is an optimistically verified bridge. In an optimistically verified bridge, these are things like Nomad or optics. You basically have the equivalent of a sequencer called an updater who is responsible for getting messages from chain A to chain B. But each message that the updater proposes has some latency period. And this latency period is to execute fraud proofs, where there can be, you know, any number of watchers who are ensuring that the updater is passing not like correct data, not fraudulent data. And if they are found to be fraudulent, or passing fraudulent data, the updater can get slashed, and then the watchers can disconnect the applications that were listening for that data, so that any harm from any fraud that has occurred is mitigated. So, oh, sorry. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about what it looks like to build a modular cross-chain application. The first layer is the base layer, which is transport. And that really is just off-chain infrastructure, and it's people who are able to run infrastructure on 2 different chains and get the data between 2 different chains. So in optimistic bridge, those are the updaters and the watchers. In an externally verified bridge, those are the verifiers. In a light client bridge, those are the relayers. People who are capable of running infrastructure on both chains. And on top of that, you have the messaging stack. And the messaging is basically governs the how of data transferring between these chains. So it's like your roll-up AMB, it's Nomad, it's your like IBC protocol. It's basically how can the data be passed between the different chains once you have people who are able to pass it. On top of that, you have a gateway stack, and these aren't live, but I expect that you'll start to see a lot of them in the near future. And this layer of the stack is responsible for kind of taking in contextual information about what domain you're on and where you're trying to go, and choosing the best messaging protocol for you to use. So if I'm on Ethereum and I'm trying to get to Optimism, the gateway protocol would say, great, use the Optimism bridge. But if I'm on Ethereum and I'm trying to get to Moonbeam, then the gateway protocol would say, okay, for this one you should probably use Nomad. And then on top of that, you have a liquidity layer. And liquidity layers are important because when you have all of these different, you know, this big heterogeneous mix of protocols that are creating your interoperability stack, you're going to have like 8,000 different flavors of assets that are incredibly annoying to deal with as a user. So like, if I'm using any swap to get to Matic, then the liquidity layer would be responsible for swapping by any USDC for POS USDC, which is actually usable on Matic. And when you take all of these layers together, you have a cohesive interoperability system that allows users to securely transfer funds to and from any domain. Sorry, clicker delay. So there's been a lot of talk about like multi-chain and not cross-chain, and how multi-chain is okay because it's more secure, because typically in a multi-chain environment, the domains have some type of state machine verification. Whereas in a cross-chain environment, that isn't guaranteed, and it becomes inherently a bit more risky. So a good example of this is like the wormhole hack, with like the full caveat that wormhole was not hacked because of its security models, it was hacked because of a smart contract bug, but the problem still exists. And in that hack, on the Solana side, there was a bug that allowed the attacker to mint a ton of wormhole ETH. They then took that wormhole ETH and withdrew it on the Ethereum side, which created a big systemic problem for the DeFi applications on Solana, because now what they had accepted as fully backed wormhole ETH was no longer fully collateralized. And you had to get like market makers jump in and kind of backstop that loss because it was a huge problem. I think, however, that we've seen a ton of different times across various situations within the market that users are going to make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily classify as secure, but they will do it because there's a lot of utility to be had there. So for example, like my WBTC, wrap BTC, is way more useful for me on Ethereum than my BTC on Bitcoin. And while my BTC on Bitcoin is much more secure, it is the native currency, is about as secure as you're going to get, I'm still going to wrap it and lock it up in some yield earning protocol that exists on Ethereum. So I think like our responsibility as builders in this ecosystem is not to force users to change their behavior, but to create environments where users can do these more risky behaviors in the safest way possible. And a good analogy is like cars. Like driving a car is obviously a risky behavior. People die doing that all the time. And the solution was not to, ban cars for forever. It was to create seatbelts and airbags so that I can drive my car and have less of a chance of dying, although it's still a slightly more risky behavior than just walking. So what does that look like, and how can I use modular interoperability to get there? So first, you have to understand intracluster communication, and this is communication for all of the domains within a system that can verify each other's state machines. So like roll-up AMBs, or IBC on Cosmos, or XCMP on Polkadot. These are all very secure messaging systems, and it allows interoperability within a single cluster. But you also have intercluster communication. And intercluster communication refers to interoperability in environments where I don't have the same state machine validation. And for that, you would use some optimistic protocol like Nomad. And when you put it all together, you have a good pattern for how to set up interoperability in these heterogeneous environments. You can use the gateway protocols to determine which messaging protocol to use in which cluster. And then you can use the optimistic messaging protocols to message between clusters. And the optimistic messaging protocols are actually really well suited to provide the backbone for intercluster communication because they have the latency built in. The latency is great for fraud proofs, but it can also be used to add in circuit breakers. So what do I mean by a circuit breaker? Well, something that adds extra verification natively if it seems like a risky or unusual transaction. In the wormhole case, what would a circuit breaker look like? It would look like, oh, someone's withdrawing 80% of the ETH on the ETH side of this bridge. Maybe I wait a bit longer before forwarding along this message. And that provides a really useful way to mitigate a lot of the risks that are present in a cross-chain environment, but maybe not necessarily in a multi-chain environment. Yeah, so that is kind of where I see interoperability going. If this was interesting to you, Connext is hiring. Please take a look at our available job postings. If this was interesting, but you're not looking for a job because your investments have done really well, still join our Discord. We'd love chatting with new people. And if you think that, like, me and you would just be really good friends, you can find me on Twitter. But yeah, I'm open to questions if anybody has any. Sweet. Well, thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy the rest of your ETH Denver.